Watch as the light breaks through the night.
What if the most powerful voice in the world belonged to a child no one ever looked at twice? What if a boy who slept on sidewalks, collected bottles for coins, and lived without a single promise of tomorrow, carried a gift that could silence thousands? And what if the world almost missed him? Miguel Santos was that child, a small Filipino boy wandering through Manila's crowded streets with a plastic bag rustling against his side. He moved quietly, unnoticed, as if afraid his footsteps might disturb the world that never made space for him. His life was a repeating cycle of hunger, noise, and the endless search for something to eat. But beneath that fragile exterior lived a voice. A voice he didn't understand. A voice he believed belonged to someone stronger, someone worth more than he ever felt. The morning sun cast soft gold across the narrow alleys as Miguel walked barefoot over warm concrete. Jeepneys honked, vendors shouted, and life rushed past him in a blur of colors and chaos. Yet in his mind, a melody flowed, gentle, comforting, like a friend who never left. He would hum just loud enough to hear himself, but never enough for others to notice. He feared the world would laugh. He feared they would remind him of who he was, a poor kid with nothing but a hidden dream. Every evening, when the city grew quiet, Miguel curled beside Aling Rosa's small food cart. It wasn't a home, but it was a place where he felt safe. She would place a warm cloth on his forehead, give him leftover rice, and watch him as he hummed himself to sleep. She always believed his voice carried something pure, but she never said it aloud. The world was cruel, and she didn't want to give him hope that might break him. Still, Miguel held one question deep inside, heavy and silent. If he vanished tomorrow, would anyone ever know the sound of the voice he carried in the dark? He didn't know it yet, but someone was about to hear him. Someone who would stop. Someone who would listen. And that single moment, the streets of Manila shaped Miguel the way the ocean shapes a stone, slowly, painfully, and with a quiet persistence that left marks no one could see. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, brushing dust from his thin shirt as the sky shifted from gray to pale orange. The air smelled of charcoal, rice porridge, and the dampness of the night that still clung to the pavement. Miguel knew every turn, every shortcut, every crack on the ground. This maze of alleys was his school, his playground, his home. Children his age ran around freely, laughing without worry. But Miguel moved with the caution of someone who had learned too early that life rarely gave second chances. He collected plastic bottles and metal scraps, trading them at a junk shop for a handful of coins, just enough for rice, sometimes not even that. Yet he never complained. Surviving itself was a kind of victory. In the middle of the market stood Aling Rosa's food cart, a small wooden stand with warm pots stacked on top. She wasn't related to Miguel, but she became the closest thing to family he knew. With her tired eyes and gentle heart, she watched over him the way a mother watches her youngest child. Sometimes, when the day was slow, Miguel would sit behind her cart and hum softly. And sometimes, when she wasn't looking, his humming blossomed into real singing. The sound floated through the morning air like a secret sunrise, soft, warm, and impossibly pure. It didn't belong to the chaos of the streets. It didn't match the hardship stamped into his daily life. It was a voice too big for his small world. Aling Rosa would pretend not to notice, but inside, she felt something tighten in her chest. She wondered how a child who had suffered so much could still hold something so beautiful. She wondered why fate would give a voice like that to someone with so little opportunity. But Miguel always stopped singing when people passed by. He didn't want to be. Thomas Reed had traveled across many countries, photographing daily life and volunteering wherever he could. But nothing prepared him for the moment he heard Miguel's voice drifting between the stalls of the crowded market. The sound was faint, like it was afraid to exist, but it stopped him mid-step. It wasn't just a voice. It was a story. A story wrapped in every note. Thomas looked around until he saw the small boy crouched beside a junk shop, sorting bottles with slow, careful hands. Miguel's shoulders were thin, his shirt faded, yet the melody coming from him felt larger than the world around them. He watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt. There was something sacred about the way Miguel sang, like a child whispering secrets to the wind. When Miguel finally noticed the stranger staring at him, he froze. His voice fell silent instantly, as if he feared he had done something wrong. His instincts told him that attention was rarely good news. But Thomas stepped closer with gentle eyes, not pitying eyes, eyes filled with wonder. He greeted Miguel softly, careful not to overwhelm him. Miguel answered with shy nods and hesitant glances, unsure of what this foreign stranger wanted. Aling Rosa approached, wiping her hands on her apron, her protective instincts rising. But Thomas introduced himself kindly, explaining that he was moved by Miguel's voice. She watched him carefully, sensing sincerity in every word. Thomas asked if Miguel could sing again, just a small piece. Miguel hesitated, fear tightening inside his chest. But when Aling Rosa gave him a subtle nod, he let out a few quiet notes. It was enough. Thomas lifted his phone and captured a short recording. Only seconds long, but those seconds carried a lifetime of emotion. That evening, he sent the clip to a friend connected with America's Got Talent, unsure if anything would come of it. He expected a slow reply. The answer arrived within minutes. "Who is this kid? Bring him. Immediately." In that moment, Miguel's world, small, fragile, ordinary, shifted ever so slightly. When Thomas shared the news with him and Aling Rosa, neither of them knew how to react. Miguel stared at the printed message, confused. America? A stage? Why him? He didn't know it yet, but his voice had finally been heard by someone who understood its worth. And destiny had begun to move. The moment Miguel stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage, the world around him felt unreal. The lights overhead shimmered like distant stars, bright and cold. The floor beneath him was smooth, far smoother than the cracked streets he was used to walking on. Everything felt too big, too loud, too shiny for someone who had once slept beside a food cart. The audience whispered the moment they saw him. A small boy in simple clothes. Nervous eyes. Barely 12. He looked like a child accidentally placed on a stage built for dreams he had never dared to imagine. Miguel's hands trembled at his sides. His breath felt trapped somewhere between fear and disbelief. He didn't know where to look, the cameras, the judges, the crowd. Every direction felt overwhelming. Simon Cowell leaned forward with his familiar, unreadable expression. He wasn't cold. He wasn't kind. He was simply curious, watching this small boy who seemed as fragile as a candle flame in a storm. Miguel felt that gaze deep in his bones. The music cue came. A soft instrumental intro filled the arena. Miguel closed his eyes, not to sing, but to remember. To remember the streets, the dawns, the hums he whispered into the dark. To remember the warmth of Aling Rosa's hands, the quiet encouragement in her eyes. To remember who he was before this moment. And then, he let go. His voice rose slowly, like a sunrise breaking over an ocean. The first note floated through the arena with a softness that silenced every whisper. It was pure, fragile, yet full of something powerful, an emotion that came from years of longing, hurt, hope, and unspoken dreams. The judges blinked. The audience leaned forward. And Simon didn't move at all. He froze. Miguel's voice climbed higher, filling every corner of the room with warmth that didn't belong to his small body. It was the kind of sound that made people forget the world for a moment. The kind that reminded them of everything they had once felt but had buried deep inside. He sang with his heart wide open, raw, honest, unprotected. And in those minutes, he was no longer the poor Filipino kid from the streets. He was a voice. A story. A miracle the world never saw coming. When the final note faded into silence, the entire arena held its breath. And then, like thunder breaking across the sky, the standing ovation rose around him. Miguel didn't understand fame. But he understood one thing. Someone, finally, had heard him. Miguel stood on the stage, trembling, as the thunder of applause washed over him. It felt unreal, like he was standing inside someone else's dream. All his life, applause had been something he heard from afar, echoing from karaoke bars or street performers. He never imagined it could be for him. But now, thousands were clapping, cheering, crying, because of his voice. He lowered his head, unsure of how to react. His instincts told him to stay small, to keep quiet, to not draw too much attention. But the sound refused to fade. It grew louder, stronger, lifting him like a rising tide. Simon Cowell stood up slowly, no dramatic gestures, no forced showmanship. Just a quiet rise that carried a weight greater than any spotlight. His eyes softened, and in that softness, Miguel saw something he had never received from a stranger before. Belief. Not pity. Not curiosity. Belief. It felt like a warm light spreading through his chest, loosening the fear he had always carried. For the first time in his life, someone powerful saw him not as a street kid, not as a poor boy trying to survive, but as someone extraordinary. Backstage, crew members hugged him, wiping tears from their eyes. They told him he changed something in them, reminded them of the beauty hidden in places the world overlooks. Miguel listened quietly, overwhelmed by emotions he didn't have words for. But even amidst the chaos, his thoughts drifted home. He saw Aling Rosa's gentle smile. Her tired hands preparing food at dawn. Her voice telling him to sleep, even when she stayed awake. He wondered if she knew what he had just done. If she felt the world shifting beneath their feet. The next morning, his performance spread across the internet like wildfire. Millions watched, shared, cried. People from around the world sent messages of hope, love, and support. They didn't know his full story, but they felt it through every note he sang. And Miguel, sitting alone in his small backstage room, finally let himself cry, soft, trembling tears not of sadness, but of release. He had spent years feeling invisible. Now the world couldn't look away. He had been heard. He had been seen. And he had become a voice that carried the weight of every child who had ever dreamed quietly in the dark.